Well, hi everyone. Kimberly Ray here with Marine Conservation Network, and I'm so glad you could join us today. We are here today with Tara Lordi. She is an innovator in Florida who is passionate about the ecosystem and the waterways and our healthy oceans. And we're going to talk to her today to give you a little insight about where everything starts that goes into the ocean, what you can do to prevent it and to help it, and any other information that you might need. So welcome, Tara. Thank you for joining us today. We really appreciate it.
Kimberly, thank you so much. I appreciate the invite, and I look forward to listening and hearing your viewers' comments and questions. It's exciting. It starts with the education.
Thank you. Exactly. And we will definitely have comments on this. This is obviously not live at the moment, but we will have comments and we'll send them to you and any contacts that come across as we're talking.
Wonderful.
Now, I've obviously done a little research and found out a little bit about your background. That you're from New York and you grew up by the rivers and the creeks and everything. But I also found out that you're a horse lover, and that's a side note because I am like definitely really passionate about horses. My husband always said that he'll lose me to a horse before a man because I just go into a whole new world. So I totally am with you there. But tell everybody just a little bit about your background and how your passion for the ecosystem and waterways began.
Sure. I grew up in the Hudson Valley, but at the bottom base of the Catskill Mountains, which is a really unique place to be brought up because you have the rivers, Hudson River flowing, you have the Shawangunk Mountains, hiking and canoeing and all these wonderful outdoor activities exist where we grew up. But you're only 60 miles from Manhattan. So you have this country mountain lifestyle, but you can also in a very short drive go into the center of the universe, right? So that was kind of exciting. I did grow up on a horse farm. My father studied biochemistry and then went off, he went off to Vietnam. My grandfather was a surgeon, and then on my dad's side. And my dad was always one of those kind of dads that it made me break up the chemical components of anything I was ever using. So if I wanted, to go to the store and I wanted, cream for my skin, he would say, well, what is that made of? I'm like, lanolin. He goes, then go get a tub of lanolin and just use that. And I say, Dad, it smells awful. Go find some rose petals and put it in. Everything was more organic. Go figure it out, figure out what it's made of. And he always pushed that agenda. We even had jokes at dinner, we had this big dining table and I couldn't sit closer to him until I guessed what the acronym was for any given element on the element chart.
Oh, wow.
Those were fun things to grow up with. But I think what it does is it does force you just to take a deeper look at everything from more of a molecular standpoint, if you will. And that I think is what led me into really dovetailing into what are we doing today and what surrounds you, and it makes you look at what you're ingesting, what's going on your skin, what water's touching your bodies, or what water are you going into. And I think that's really where it started. But I also grew up on a horse farm, so communicating with animals and learning how to devise ways to understand what they need and their nurturing needs at 7 years old, I think was very helpful as well. Because fish can't read, right? So we have to learn how to judge animals and other species by the way they behave, because they can't necessarily talk. So you have to learn how to understand their behavior so that you can make a judgment call on what's going on. Everything from butterflies to fish, aquatic life, and in our specific conversation today, aquatic life, and how are they behaving and what's happening to the aquatic life underneath and the bottom where you can't see, and what are the patterns they're expressing. If you look at the Red Sea, there was an article today, there's fish dead everywhere. I mean, it's horrible. So we need to listen, not just with the words, but we need to observe, and I think that's what's really important. And I learned that as growing up, very important.
That's really fantastic. That's really wonderful. I myself am also a native Floridian. I was born and raised in Florida, and very much so raised up with the nature and listening to nature and the animals. So that's really interesting and wonderful that that's how it all started for you, is in the home.
Yeah.
Now, being a Floridian, I know that Florida is full of ponds and rivers and creeks, canals, you know, all over the place. How much of the Florida waterways do you cover? And is the problem rampant with aquatic weed growth? Is it an ongoing issue, or is it just increased recently?
Well, global warming has been something that's been happening. Mathematically, we can draw certainty from that. And with the idea of hotter climates are hotter waters, and with the idea of hotter waters breeds more vegetation. And unfortunately, the vegetation comes in two halves, either native or invasive. So it's getting worse, is the answer to your question. And on the lakes, well, we've got roughly 3 million lakes in the United States, and about over 100 million lakes in the world. Our vessels and what we're doing, we're in 14 countries now. So we started in Florida. We're largely, I think we're, don't quote me on this, but I would say almost all the municipalities are just on the cover of Municipal magazine. Almost all the municipalities either know about us or are using us, as well as lake maintenance companies. We are the sole source for this type of product. But we also found that Texas was huge in responding to using mechanical harvesting. I think they all like driving tractors. Let me start that. Exactly. They do like our water tractors. So they've become a really big source. The Northeast, New York, Pennsylvania,
Wow.
Philadelphia. But yeah, we're very large in the United States, but we're also now in 14 countries. So unfortunately, it's a global problem. Yeah,
that's wonderful. And when you think of Texas, you wouldn't normally think of Texas having a water weed problem. You think of like this big desert out there, because when we traveled from Florida to California, you go through this big area of nothing. There's just nothing and nothing and nothing. So you don't even realize that. I'm glad that you pointed that out to everybody, that there are other areas with water weeds that we really have to be aware of and protect the waterways. How is your system different than, say, the other systems that are out there, to where they're putting chemicals or they're trying to pull it up by hand or other things that are going on? How is your system different with your Weedoos?
So let's take a lake, for example. You have really three ways to get these harmful invasive weeds out of there. You have, you could use divers, hand pullers. They're actually physically taking bags and pushing the weeds into bags and then removing them. That's very expensive and it takes a lot of time. A second method is using herbicides, which unfortunately we can go over the disadvantages of that. And a third way is mechanical harvesting. And traditionally, before weed became something, the mechanical harvesters were very large, big, huge barges. Some of them were powered by these, big wheels, and they just were really hard to get into waterways, or they'd break down and they couldn't find parts, and that's what they had. So I don't blame the scientists for coming up with herbicides, because hand pulling was too expensive and the big harvesters weren't really logical, but I do blame them now. So herbicides are really terrible. A lot of them have one thing in common, and that's cellular death. So let's take that into consideration when you're nuking a lake, okay? Cellular death is a big deal. I am spraying either copper sulfate or some type of chemical composition that's going to create cellular death. And when I spray that, two things are going to happen. The weed will die. Possibly the good weeds will die as well, but it will sink to the bottom. It's not being removed. It's actually going to the bottom of the lake. Now, the problem with that is you'll eventually start getting that biomass buildup from the bottom of the lake up. You'll reduce the depths of your water. And frankly, do you really want to be harvesting fish if they've been swimming around feeding off the bottom of that with those chemicals that have been treated over the years? So we've determined after some time how and what it does to a lake over a period of time for spraying. Not to mention some of these species like hydrilla, basically they're being resistant to the chemicals. They develop resistant strains to fight these chemicals. These little weeds have a mind of their own, and then it's forcing them to spray more and more, and you can see how badly chemical treatments are. So
it's
now
like
we have a
it's like a
solution.
catch-22. I mean, you're
That's
trying
right.
to stop the weeds, but you keep putting in more chemicals and then they become more resistant to it. You got to add more chemicals. So it makes it like a catch-22 to kind of beat the process.
You're 100% right. It is. And by spraying more, now you've got a really disastrous situation. So I find, I've been educating people throughout the world in the US, especially about this process. And I have found New York's probably, especially the Adirondacks, is one of the most stringent states with regard to chemical spraying. They're very, very strict about it. And they do soil sampling and soil testing to try to keep in front of what the spraying is doing. But unfortunately, they're even starting to put their hands in the air because they just can't keep up. So mechanical harvesting is really your only method that will safely remove the biomass, that will allow the biomass to be removed immediately so you have navigational waters, the visual sight is better, and you're not contaminating the waters with anything chemically. Now, on the mechanical removal side, you have Weedoo boats, you have some of the larger harvesters out there, and you have a couple amphibious options, but they don't have the propulsion. So again, time is money. So the key to mechanical harvesting is to be able to remove biomass at a speed at which we can remove 500 pounds a minute.
Wow.
So I can come into a 10-acre lake and in 5 days have your lake clean. We're done. See you next quarter, or however long we have to before we come back.
That's
Time
fantastic.
is money. So
that's fantastic.
right.
One question our followers would have is that trying to be as much with nature as possible and not putting any chemicals or anything like that into the waterways. They've come up with the idea of thinking about, what about manatees? What about having the manatees in those areas eat those? Now, I know that they eat seagrass, but are the weeds that you removed the ones that could be hazardous to the manatees? Or is that even a thought process to have them in there?
So I'm a big advocate of using one form of nature to help another form. I really am. I've had people tell me carp works a little, to some degree. The thing with the manatees, these beautiful, gentle mammals, there's two problems I see with the manatees is, are we putting these manatees into lakes that have already been treated with chemicals? And if so, we're poisoning them. That's a big one, right? That's number one. Number two, a lot of these lakes are for boaters and navigational channels, and manatees are big, gorgeous mammals that can get hit by those props. So depending on the depth of the lake you're referring to, and depending on what's been treated, I think we'd have to come back to that question, and then determine if it's safe for them, and refer to the Marine Mammal Protection Act and see if they feel it's safe.
Exactly. That's actually a very good point.
Yeah.
We out here in California, we help enforce the Marine Mammal Protection Act, and a lot of times we have sea lions, not manatees, but sea lions come ashore with domoic acid, and a lot of it is natural, but some of it is because of the chemicals that are in the water. So that's a very good point to make.
Okay.
What kind of hurdles have you had to overcome with your company? Because I know a lot with the fish and wildlife out there, that there are certain rules that you have to follow or permits you have to get. What are you coming up against those obstacles with the fish and game and fish and wildlife in order to have your business, or are things like working out?
Yeah, it's a great question. Originally when we first started, at first they were like, what is that? It looked like a skid steer for the water. And then they realized, wow, this is great. So the answer is no, we generally don't have permitting as an issue because we're doing what's called lake maintenance.
Okay.
And permittable things are where you change the shape of the lake. If I went in and I drilled down and I changed the bottom of the lake, and I did any type of what we call dredging, that's more permittable option. If I'm spraying chemicals, that's permittable. You have to get permits for that.
Okay.
But no, we have found in our client base and in our experience that no, the FWC here in Florida, the DEC throughout the US, they welcome us with open arms. They understand that we're there to, and let me really dramatically say, precision harvest these weeds out of there. And I say that because there are natives
Okay.
And you don't want to remove bulrush, but you do want to remove the hydrilla. You want to keep your natives there for food chain and for oxygen, but you
Okay.
want to go ahead and remove, the more invasives. And it's important in the front attachments and the various attachments we've built, but the tines on the front attachment allow us to gently pull out what you need to pull out and not have any bycatch. I'm not taking turtles and fish out of the water because they're going through the tines, but I am removing those dangerous invasives. So yeah, no, no permits usually necessary, as long as you're not changing the lake bank or removing the bottom natural shores.
That's really good to hear. That's really good to hear, because a lot of organizations out there, unfortunately, they go against those hurdles, and those hurdles can be very difficult to get past. So I'm really happy that you're successful with that. How long has Weedoo been in business?
So we actually formed, we started really building in like 2002, but we formed the company in 2010. And one of those things where we started out with aluminum hull, and then we're like, no, that's no good. And then we kind of threw a lot of things against the wall. And so by 2010, my late husband and I formed the company, and I lost him actually about 9 years later in 2019 from esophageal cancer. So I took the reins of the company back in 2016 when he had to start his chemo and radiation. And we have been growing every year, about 20 to 30% every year since 2016. So I'm proud of our growth.
That is fantastic.
Yeah.
That is fantastic. And we just missed the International Women's Day. I wish we could have gotten together sooner, because you definitely are an inspiration for making a difference, making oceans a difference, as we say here in MCN. So I'm really inspired and proud to know that you're out there making a difference. And I'm sorry for your loss with your husband. My condolences.
Thank you.
But
Thank you.
I also wanted to ask you, I mean, you had mentioned in our previous conversation that you actually had somebody come out, an astronaut come out, that wanted to purchase one of your boats. That's fantastic. How did you go about expanding your business? You said you're in 14 different countries now. How did that happen? Was it just word of mouth, or did you go out and actually market to these other countries? How did you go about doing that?
So luckily we live in a world of digital marketing, and digital marketing. We're in an industry where there really isn't many of us that even have anything to do with this. So it wasn't hard to be the leader in that. But yeah, you have to target properly who you want your listeners to be. So we would talk to municipalities, we would talk to government. I was always reaching out to different senators and trying to get them to stop spraying herbicides and take a look at our project. I reached out to a lot of different organizations. NASA is somebody I reached out to. We reach out to homeowner associations to try to explain our method. And we do this by lovely interviews like you're doing with me now. We also use various methods like Google and Facebook boosts, and try to get to these places. We do trade shows to try to get out there. But yeah, I mean, being in a digital market, and when there's catastrophes and you have a problem like the red tide, they call us. And when they call us and we come out to render support or get them to buy the boats so they can help, then they brag about it and it becomes a viral marketing, right? So people are out there going, look what I have and look what I'm doing. Hey, try this. And so my customers are better sellers than we are.
That's usually the way it is.
Yeah.
You mentioned about the red tide. Has the red tide been any aspect of your business recently at all, to where you've been requested for more products and more service?
Yes, the red tide. So one of the red tide is actually a natural thing, the phenomenon that's been happening for some time. It doesn't make it better with runoff, I assure you. But the terrible thing with the red tide is the fish kill. And when you have fish kill, the front end loader of our vessel allows you to go through and remove them safely and into hazmat types of containers and offload them properly so that the moment the red tide does hit, it will destroy a lot of your aquatic life. But at least we can get it out of there before it becomes horrendous. And they're using our vessels as we speak. I just saw an article today they're using all of our vessels to scoop up the aquatic life that's passed on.
Now, do you have to wait till it's a certain amount of deceased wildlife before you can go out there and clean it up, or just as
Nope.
soon as it starts making a
As
nuisance?
they pop up, get them
Yeah.
out.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen them use our vessels to pick up alligators that have passed on.
Wow.
As soon as they have any type of floating debris, fish, weeds, anytime they go right out there and they start getting rid of them, because they'll deteriorate, and it will cause an unpleasant situation in a very quick period of time.
That's good to hear. Some companies like to wait till it hits a certain mark before they go out there and make a difference. But the fact that you just go right out there right away, that's fantastic.
Yeah,
Because the quicker the process, the better we get back to being healthy.
that's right. That's right.
That's wonderful.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I actually saw one of your videos on your YouTube channel of one of your machines removing the weeds in one of the lakes at a resident's home. When you
Yes.
remove the weeds, what do you end up doing with them?
So I love when my customers tell me all their cool stories, because I mean, I live through what they tell me. And I have one customer who takes the front end of our skimmer bucket and extracts duckweed. And then he puts that duckweed through a compressor and he makes cubes. And those cubes actually have quite a bit of protein, a very high level of protein. And those cubes are then fed to the livestock. So the cattle are eating the cubes. So and these are lakes that haven't been treated, obviously. So that makes me feel really great. Again, one resource and natural resource feeding another, which is fantastic. I've heard other people explain how rich in protein and in other nutrients that some weeds are. So they use them for fertilizer around their orange groves and their orange trees.
That's wonderful.
And so whenever you can use a product that you're removing from one resource and to enhance another, that's really what we all strive for. It's the golden.
Exactly. Recycle and reuse. Exactly. That's fantastic. I'm glad they're doing that.
Yeah, me too. Yeah.
How do you feel that what you're doing helps the overall health of the ocean? Because Marine Conservation Network, we focus obviously on the ocean, but the waterways lead into it, and everything that we put into this earth, into this world, goes from the waterways to the ocean. So how do you feel that what you're doing with the Weedoos is helping the overall health of the ocean?
Well, I can give you a real live example of how I think we helped. For example, I think it starts up at Reedy Creek, and then near Disney, comes all the way down, funnels into Lake O. It passes a lot of farms. You've got Big Sugar. You have all these folks that have runoff. And then when you get to Lake O, they were spraying, Lake Okeechobee, they were spraying herbicides. Then they have to let the water out of Lake Okeechobee because the dam otherwise would, collapse. So as they let water out, they let it out through the channels that go straight through these smaller hamlets and then ultimately into the ocean. And a few years ago, we had a really big problem because there were too much nutrients. There were too much toxic chemicals. So when you have runoff from your farming and your land meet the herbicide sprays in the water, you become very toxic, and it becomes these toxic blooms. Now take this large body of water and reduce it into smaller canals to make its way to the ocean, and it hovers in people's marinas around their boats and makes these looks like little pink cotton candy, but it's absolutely horrific and it's very dangerous. And we watched this happen, and it was absolutely terrible. So I think that if you utilize mechanical harvesting, you'll limit the amount of herbicide spray. If you limit the amount of herbicide spray, you can prevent land fertilizers, meaning water fertilizers. There we can obviously help hugely. I think that people need to be a little more responsible with the runoff, but from the purposes of Weedoo, we can stop the herbicide side. And if we can stop that, then the runoff perhaps would be less toxic.
Exactly. And a lot of people in theory, they think once everything gets out to the ocean, it dissipates because the ocean is so vast, and it really doesn't. It goes down the food chain. So that's exactly right. So that's great. I'm really happy that you're doing this. Because like I said in the very beginning, it all starts at home. It all starts on the land. But the water is like 50% of our oxygen. It's our medicine and our food. So if we don't take care of that, obviously it's going to come back to us tenfold, and that's not what we want.
That's right. That's right.
How have you spread? I mean, you said this earlier that a lot of your marketing and your growth has come from word of mouth and how
Mhm.
you've contacted everybody.
Yes.
How can they get in touch with you? If people want to get in touch with
Yeah.
you to where they want to know what they can do for their waterways, or if they want to purchase one of your Weedoo boats, how can they get in touch with you?
Yeah, thank you. So you can, obviously, we have a website, and that's weedooboats.com, weedooboats.com. We can also be reached 561-204-5765. My extension is 101, and I would take and field any call if you want to talk about your local area or the problems that you face. I might be able to render some support, or maybe find your local councilman to assist you. We're not just here to sell a product. We're here to leave the world a better place than when we had it, right? So I'm not just a manufacturer. We've got a mission, and we're here to help you. And I know that sometimes people feel, hey, I'm just one person and she's a company, I can't do anything, but I promise you, you can. You can locate whatever body of water that's near you, find out who owns it, find out what they're doing. And if you live in a homeowners association, it's your right to ask your HOA what they're doing to treat your waters, because they might be using that very lake for your irrigation. So it's super, super important that you find out what's being put in it and how it's being cared for. And feel free to call us and we'll help you.
That is fantastic. That is fantastic advice. Thank you
Yeah.
so much today for taking time out of your day to sit with us. And
Thank you.
the information that you have is just phenomenal. I mean, we educate and mentor our followers and everything on that. There's always something you can do. Just because you're landlocked, just because you're one person, there's always something. It's just taking the action.
Yes,
So
that's
you
right.
have definitely taken the action. You've definitely made a breakthrough to where it's going to make a big difference, oceans of difference, as we say here. But again, I really appreciate you being on today. And thank you, everybody, for joining us and watching us. There's going to be more information. We'll post this up on our website to where you can contact Tara, or you can contact us if you need any information. And we are definitely going to be looking forward to more contacts and connection with you. And
Thank you
everybody,
so much. It's
you're
been a
welcome.
pleasure.
And thank you. It was definitely a pleasure meeting you and speaking with you today. And
And
thank you, everybody. And remember, together we can make oceans a difference. Everybody have a good day. Bye.
Bye-bye.